What's up, guys? My name is Park Score. Today we're going to be talking about the 5 most mind-altering, influential books I've ever read. So, since about college age, I've been a pretty big reader. Actually, whenever I was young, I was a pretty big reader. I would read Harry Potter, I'd be into all sorts of fiction. It wasn't until, later in my 20s that I started getting into nonfiction, but whenever I was in college and about to graduate, I started taking reading a lot more seriously. I always thought it was something that would give me an edge in life. A lot of people nowadays, with the way entertainment is, nobody's reading serious books anymore. Nobody's really reading anything anymore. Most of what people are reading is like smut and stuff. So I always thought that if I took reading seriously as a hobby, then it would bear fruit. And so in today's video, I'm just going to talk about 5 books that really kind of changed the trajectory of my life and just, I think, probably shaped me as a person today. I wouldn't even say these are necessarily my favorite books of all time. These are just some books that really kind of altered my personality or changed my worldview in a way that I think was pretty significant and that I'm very thankful for. So these are in chronological order. So starting off, we have the meme book that everyone clowns on, Infinite Jest. Yes, I know, this book is a meme. Nowadays, nobody takes this book seriously because only dude-lit bros read this book. But in all seriousness, I picked this up whenever I was maybe 19 years old. I was in college. I just now started smoking the herb, and I heard that this book was about smoking the herb, and I heard that people who read this book were universally seen as very smart and cool. Right? There was all kinds of memes about how people would read this book only to be seen reading it. And I kind of thought, well, why is this book seen as like this status symbol of like a super smart person? And the reason is because this book, it's a fiction book about this thing called, what do they call it? It's The Entertainment. And The Entertainment is essentially an experimental film that is so entertaining that once people watch it, they cannot stop watching it until they, defecate on themselves and eventually pass away. And so it's set in sort of the near future. It is in sort of a semi-fantastical world where the United States and Canada and Mexico have all merged into one country called Onan. And Onan, for those of you who don't know, Onan was, in the biblical stories, someone who is known to be a symbol of self-gratification. And this book very much deals with themes like pleasure as like the ultimate end and the sort of problems that people run into with pleasure as the ultimate end. Obviously, The Entertainment, this film, is an allegory for addiction. David Foster Wallace himself was, he struggled with alcohol, and the book deals with mostly things like drugs, things like addictive relationships, addictive behaviors, and overall, it was very entertaining. I undertook this book because I wanted to seem smart, and actually, it's funny because you'll see things online. People will clown a certain type of literature because only a certain type of person reads this type of book. But what I found with this book is even if there's a meme around something, and even if you sort of undertake something for the wrong reasons, it can actually be a very fruitful experience. This is a very long book. It is not a short read. It's around like 1,100 pages, and about 200 of those are just footnotes. And so it's not a light read, but it definitely helps me build up some confidence around my ability to sort of tackle really huge texts. And it also gave me the confidence to sort of begin to evaluate literature apart from what people would sort of like attribute to it. So even though this is sort of seen as a meme book and people will clown people who read it, I actually think, if you actually undertake to read this book and you actually do read it, then it's actually it's a very good read. There was a good 2 years after I read it where I would pretty much think about it every single day. So can't recommend that one enough. And so that book actually, it gave me an appreciation for books that are sort of seen as classics, because even Infinite Jest is sort of a modern classic. Now, Like I said, I was in college. I was very much pursuing pleasure as an end. And it wasn't until later in my college years that I started to see the real problem in this. Even though I had read Infinite Jest stops short of any sort of real, you could say, like faith-based solution. Or if it does regard faith in any way, it has sort of a shallow view of faith where, faith is something that people in Alcoholics Anonymous sort of use to get themselves up off the ground. But David Foster Wallace himself, we all know he committed, self-deletion. And he himself was not very outspoken. If he was religious at all, he wasn't very outspoken about it. And so the second book on my list is The Brothers Karamazov. So again, this is one of those meme books where everyone talks about how, people who read this book, dude bros that read this book are just like not serious or whatever. Once again, very, very big book. I had read a little bit of Dostoevsky before reading Brothers Karamazov. I had read Crime and Punishment actually before reading Brothers Karamazov. And I read Crime and Punishment right before or right after Infinite Jest. And I can honestly say, I did not appreciate Crime and Punishment. I did not appreciate Dostoevsky at the time of reading Crime and Punishment because I sort of wasn't mature enough to see all that was going on in the book. Brothers Karamazov is probably the best book I've ever read in my entire life. Probably the most influential. And the reason why is because it introduced me to a way of seeing Christianity and a Christian worldview that I had never been introduced to before. So Dostoevsky, obviously, he's a Russian novelist. The predominant form of Christianity in Russia is Orthodox Christianity. I grew up in the American South, and so the deepest form of Christianity that we were ever really exposed to was like Baptist and like various Protestant instantiations of Christianity. But this book kind of made me really realize that Christianity is actually a philosophical religion. It is deeply philosophical. We are not an anti-intellectual religion. And also, whenever I came across this book, it was actually right after I had read Friedrich Nietzsche's Beyond Good and Evil. And I sort of went through this very brief period at the end of my college phase where I was not an atheist. I've never been an atheist, but I sort of had such a shallow view of theology and a shallow view of Christianity that I kind of took Nietzsche at face value, and I did sort of believe that morality was this thing that was totally contrived by human societies and history. And so I sort of experimented with being totally evil for a time, and I quickly learned through various failures in my life that you can't be evil and get away with it. And this book actually seems to really have that as a theme. And the idea here is that there's three brothers. Their father is a total degenerate. One of the brothers is the oldest brother. He is a soldier. He's a man of action. The middle brother is an intellectual. He's an atheist. His name is Ivan. And the youngest brother, Alyosha, he is the protagonist of the novel. He is an Orthodox Christian monk. And even though he's not necessarily able to answer to his older brother, who is an atheist, because Ivan, the atheist, he's very smart. Dostoevsky, he does not pull any punches with his villains. He does not strawman his villains. He really wants to let ideologies sort of play themselves out and go to battle in his novels. But Alyosha, you end up finding throughout the novel that Alyosha is sort of the most heroic of all of these figures, and it is precisely because of his faith. And so this book was really formative for me because it made me realize Christianity actually is a very intellectually serious, not just religion, but endeavor for the individual. So I graduated college and I actually started taking Christianity seriously. I started taking life more seriously. I started realizing I have no prospects. I went to school for film and TV production and there's no real jobs in that field. That's a totally fake degree. And so I kind of was panicked and I was like, what am I going to do with my life? Where am I going to go? How am I going to make money? How am I even going to eat? I had started doing freelance videography for some punk rock venues in Houston. And I was like, I'm making pennies doing this. I'm actually sort of going into debt trying to build up this video portfolio of mine. Where is this even going to lead? Is this even worth it? And then I came across the third book on the list, which is Robert Greene's Mastery. So again, Robert Greene is not seen as a super serious writer in a lot of more intellectual literary circles, but this book came at the right time for me. He has another book called 48 Laws of Power, and that's a meme book because people always talk about how 48 Laws of Power is this like dark psychology book, and people who read it think that they're, you know, gonna become super geniuses because they read about the 48 Laws of Power, and you end up just acting like a total jackass, which is a lot like the Friedrich Nietzsche book Beyond Good and Evil. But this book actually was a lot more pragmatic. I think a lot more practical. And the main idea behind this book is it's essentially a case study into various geniuses, various great men and women throughout history, and people who have made just huge breakthroughs or people who have achieved insane success. So one of the main things I got from this book was just kind of realizing through the lives of all of these great, sort of admirable human beings, how difficult it is to actually succeed in like a super notable way. Like if you want to have any amount of really great success in life, as you know, Sacha Baron Cohen in Borat says, great success, then you are going to have to pretty much commit to 10 years of very serious discipline in more than one area. That's another thing from this book, is that a lot of the people who had their success are people who were sort of on many paths at one time. They were incredibly industrious in the development of multiple skills, and they eventually get their success by somehow, just through some epiphany, finding a way to combine these skills in a way that no one else can sort of compete with. And so it's only through a very, very long process of developing yourself, developing your skill set, and gaining experience in a certain area that you will be able to actually make any sort of like breakthroughs in that area. It's not, I mean, it's not a bad thing to pursue greatness in this life. You know, there's nothing wrong with trying to be great at what you do. And also, I just think the book overall was very formative for me. It helped me really put my young 20-something-year-old experience into context. A big thing in the book was essentially how he said a lot of these people, they would take positions that maybe paid less money, but offered them more freedom to sort of experiment and to grow and to develop. So it's sort of, they were putting off that immediate gratification in order to reap some greater, more fulfilling reward later on. And so it helped me kind of put into context where I was at in my life. I was like, okay, even though I'm not making a ton of money right now doing video, if I keep at it, if I get better at my craft, if I develop a portfolio, if I sort of always continually reinvest in myself, then eventually it will pay off. The next book was a book. So again, I was pretty dead set. I was like, okay, I feel like I know what I need to do in terms of my career. But you know, when you're reading sort of pop literature or you're reading a lot of modern literature, the idea is it's hard for the ideas to stick unless you have a very serious foundation, a very serious grounding. And again, as I was saying earlier, I was already pretty interested in Christianity and you know, trying to understand it on a deep philosophical sort of a level. And you know, I'd been watching a lot of Jordan Peterson. I'd been engaging with Dostoevsky and Christian philosophers like Kierkegaard. I'd read a lot of Christian stuff at this point, but what I had not read was the Holy Bible. And this is number 4 on my list. Again, this is in a chronological order. Obviously, the Bible it's the scriptures for us Christians, and so it's just going to be in a whole nother echelon of, you know, value than these other books. But I kind of had this realization one day where I was like, you know what? I'm trying to be a Christian. I'm trying to understand these stories, and I'm trying to like live out the Christian ethic. I should read this. I should read the Bible, because where I'm from, obviously, you know, everyone's a Protestant, so everything's super sola scriptura. Oh, it's the Bible alone, the Bible alone. But I and most people I know actually have not read this whole book, and actually, I can be totally honest in saying the culture that I've grown up in here in the South, they sort of view the Bible as something that you kind of draw from every now and then. You pick it up, you flip to a random page when you're in need of some fortune cookie advice, but it's not something that people actually set out to like read the whole thing, unless you're some hardcore Bible thumper, right? That's a term you hear a lot in the South, Bible thumper. And so I was like, well, why don't I become a Bible thumper? Because I was like, I always found it really impressive, those people who could just pull scripture out, because it always seemed like they were just like super ready to go. Like they could spar, verbally. They were they usually just seemed well equipped. And I was like, why don't I go ahead and get well equipped with this book that literally every other book is pretty much based on. And so for people who are maybe thinking about reading this, I'm going to tell you right now, like I did not realize until I had actually read the whole Bible or tried to read the whole Bible, how much of Western culture is actually founded on the Bible and the stories in the Bible and the ideas in the Bible. If you have not read the Bible or you haven't seriously contended with at least the New Testament, you're functionally illiterate, and I have no reason to take your opinion on anything. And I'm not being rude, I'm just sort of being very realistic. It's sort of like a fish that has no idea what water is, right? If you have not at least tried to read this book and kind of understand what's in it, then you're not intellectually serious. It's going to be very impossible for you to contend with anyone who actually has read and studied and tried to understand these stories. And I only say that because, like I said, so much of Western culture and history and thought has been based on the ethic, the metaphysics, and the epistemology of this book right here. This book is, you kind of can't get around it. There's no like cheat code, there's no hack. You can't become like a well-read person without having read this book. And it's a stumbling block for a lot of people, because a lot of people will just be like, it's an ancient book, it's written by men. Yes, it is written by men. It is written by men. Men wrote down those words. It did not fall out of the sky. But you still have to read it. So I'm sorry, you have to read it. But I know that it can be super overwhelming jumping into the Bible if you've never read it before. So what I will recommend is don't try to read from the Old Testament onward, because a lot of people, they'll get to the sections about so-and-so begat so-and-so begat so-and-so, and they'll be like, oh my gosh, when does this Jesus guy come along? So don't try to read from the Old Testament onward if your goal is to read the whole Bible. You should start at the New Testament and sort of read through the New Testament and then go back and read the Old Testament. And then start in the Gospels, right? Start in the Gospels, read about the life of Jesus, specifically the Sermon on the Mount. And also, if you're going to do the fortune cookie reading program, don't do it all over the whole Bible, because you're going to end up flipping to a verse that you don't have the context for, and you're going to take it totally out of context, and you're going to be like, that's literally me. That's literally me. I'm the Messiah. Oh my gosh, that's how people get all this crazy talk. They read stuff out of context. But if you're going to flip to a random page, make sure that it's always in Proverbs. So Proverbs specifically was one of the most useful books for me getting into the Bible, because Proverbs is essentially just these one-liners that are it's just conventional, practical wisdom. A lot of the Proverbs, you don't even have to be a person of great faith or anything to get value from the Proverbs. They're very practical. If you implement them into everyday life, you commit a few of them to memory, and you actually apply them in your life, you will see good fruit from that. And it's just because this is like the foundational wisdom of our culture. Now finally, the fifth book on the list. This book, pound for pound, probably gave me some of the biggest, most groundbreaking insights in my young adult life. This book very much has helped to supplement all of the realizations that I got from all these other books. It is a dense text. Okay, it's very intellectual text. It's not going to be easy for everyone, but it's well worth it if you will read it slowly and you'll really try to ingest everything that's in it. And so, give you a little background. Everything I just mentioned, I was, early in my career. I'm shooting videos for punk rock venues. I'm trying to become sort of an artist for myself. I'm trying to become a great man of history, right? And I'm trying to apply the wisdom of the Bible, and I'm trying to understand the Bible on a deep level. And I'm using the Jordan Peterson hermeneutic, where Jordan Peterson is essentially, his view of the Bible is that it's all about self-improvement, man. But I was running into a lot of roadblocks, and I was actually finding that, drawing out lessons from some of these stories, it's not quite that simple. And at the same time, there was just a lot of things, a lot of interpersonal relationship things that I was kind of grappling with, trying to figure out. Career things, relationship things, geopolitical things, all sorts of things. Things Hidden Since the Foundation of the World by René Girard. This book introduced me to what is called mimetic theory. Mimetic theory is Girard's theory. So Girard, he was a literary scholar, and he sort of found this common thread throughout all of human literature, all of human psychology, and it's this thing called mimetic desire. And mimetic desire is, put in the most simple way possible, it is wanting what other people want, right? And wanting it because other people want it. And this book taught me a lot about human psychology. It taught me why I was desiring the things that I was desiring, why desiring what other people desire, or desiring what other people already have or what I perceive them to have, is kind of a problem and was leading me to a lot of just issues, messiness in my life, right? This book really opened me up to that idea. And it also taught me a lot about what Girard calls the scapegoat mechanism. And the scapegoat mechanism is essentially a view of history where all civilizations are founded on a sort of narrative. And all narratives, all founding myths, have to essentially be founded on a founding victim, someone who must be excluded from the current social order in order for the current social order to have this sort of foundational myth that everyone can get on board with. And in the ancient days, a scapegoat could be someone who is seen as a witch. That person's a witch. That's why we have all of our problems. We need to scapegoat them. We need to unalive them in a very brutal fashion. That's the scapegoat mechanism, and it is sort of this cyclical process of history that Satan, you could say, has used to spur on the unending cycle of violence throughout human history. And all of it is with the promise of a sort of worldly kingdom of peace and a sort of transcendence of the self, What's the foundational story of the Bible? The foundational story of the Bible, or in Genesis, the first human beings, they fell because they wanted to be like God. They wanted to exalt themselves to this sort of ultimate place. And why does Cain unalive Abel in the Genesis story? Well, he does because it appears that God accepts Abel's sacrifices and does not accept Cain's sacrifices. Cain does not like this. He's envious of this. He wants what he perceives Abel to sort of have as a natural result of his nature, his being. And so he contrives to kill his brother because he wants what his brother has. And so this book, I'm telling you, pound for pound, this book probably has some of the most groundbreaking insights into human psychology I've ever seen in any book, right? It sent me on a whole rabbit hole of reading all of his other works. It allowed me to meet a lot of people online who are also interested in this exact same thing. And it gives you a whole view of history, human psychology, human sociology, politics, and even just your own self, your own personal development. Because what is this book if not me seeing the fullness of being of these so-called great people and wanting to imitate them, see? And so those are the 5 books that were the most transformative for me in my life. Like I said, I've read a lot of other books since then that I think I probably enjoyed a lot more than even these, but pound for pound, these books were probably the most transformative and the most life-altering. If you try and read these books yourself, you might get the same thing out of them, you might get a little bit less out of them, you might get even more out of them. One thing I'll encourage you guys to do is just pursue your own interest wholeheartedly. If a certain book stands out to you or a certain book seems like it's really important for you to read it, take notes, really try to understand it, really try to absorb it. If you feel like you can't remember everything in that book, it doesn't matter. I don't remember everything that I read in all of these books, but it's a lot like a meal. Like I might not remember the taste of it in my mouth, but nevertheless, it's become a part of my body and it shapes who I am today. So have a great day.